And just want to give a huge thank you to Suffolk University Sawyer Business School, where we are right now, for hosting Startup Boston. Suffolk University hosts a lot of great opportunities for learning, both in and outside of these classrooms. We really appreciate their partnership, hosting the entirety of Startup Boston Week, both last year and this year. The team that creates Startup Boston Week is all volunteer-led, and the folks working the conference today here are volunteering their time as well. So thank you so much for attending. It's a labor of love, and we really appreciate you playing a role in shaping our startup community. And let's get the ball rolling. Go ahead, guys.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dan Pereira. I'm head of design at Goldcast. We've put together a really great panel today to talk about brand and product design and all things in between. And just so you have a little context about who we are, we're going to do some intros. I'm currently head of design at a Series A startup. In previous lives, I've been head of product at a seed stage startup. And before that, I was in brand consulting. So I did a lot of brand and product innovation work. And so this is a great panel with a diverse point of view. And I'm going to send it to the other end to Tristan to start introductions.
All right. Hi, I'm Tristan Dwyer. I'm currently a product designer at Microsoft working on their industrial AI stuff. It's a little odd for a early brand discussion, but prior to that, I've spent about the past 9 years in startups, both early stage, like very, very early, first 10 people, and then another self-driving startup called Motional for the past 4 years. And then prior to that, I worked at design agencies in the Boston area, a lot of like brand focus and like interactive content. So that's it.
Hey, everybody. My name is Angie Meltzner. I currently run my own research studio called Tomato Baby. And before that, I worked in agencies, consultancies, in-house with teams. And I focused doing research around product and design, but also brand research, research to inform brand strategy, creative strategy, cultural research, trend research, things like that, basically for all different types of clients to help them better understand the people that they want to understand.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Schoen. I'm head of design at Blink UX. Blink UX is a UX consultancy firm that does research and design work for a wide range of clients, from small to big, including many startups over the years. I lead our product envisioning and brand experience projects, and I head up our Boston office, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We've got our headquarters in Seattle and offices throughout the country. And I'm really passionate about brand and product, and eager to dig into some of these topics with you all today.
All right, awesome. All right, since we have a bunch of folks in the room, I'm going to do a little audience poll here. Who here thinks that brand is your logo? Show of hands. Who thinks brand is something more than that? Everybody, great. So let's do some scene setting. Angie, you do a lot of brand research. I can't think of a better place to start than asking, what is brand to you?
Yeah, so your brand is a promise, right? It's when someone closes your eyes and hears your brand name, like what do they think of? They are thinking about your values as a company and as a brand, your quality in whatever you're putting out, the experience that you provide, the story that you tell, and really importantly, the consistency of that and how all of those things fit together to tell your brand story. And that commitment that you're making to your customers on what they can expect is what your brand is. All the assets and things that like your logo, your name, your color palette, all of that comes after you understand what your promise is that you're making to people. And that's ultimately what brand is. What do you think, Tristan?
All right. It's hard to kind of top that because I think I agree with all of that. I think, one thing that about brand is that over the years, I think there's been a lot of sort of change in perception of what that means. I know one thing, when I was earlier in my career as a designer, I went to school for graphic design, brand identity was a big part of it, and it was a big part of how I thought about it. But as time went on, and I particularly worked in product company, I was able to see how, brand sort of expands beyond that. Even things that could seem sort of like, like a tagline, like a company's tagline or mission statement. Some companies may just have one and no one really sticks to it, but good brands really like sort of embody that. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Ben.
Sure. Yeah, I'll agree with what you guys said. I think, at Blink, we're passionate about thinking of the product is the brand, that experience that people have with your products. That's a brand experience. And so when you talk about brand, you really want to think product first. As was mentioned, brand is the feeling that someone has when experiencing or using your product. At the same time, in your startup, in your organizations, in your projects, like brand for us in the product are sort of, the things that we can control. So what are those brand assets that are going to, help you get to the brand that you want? So thinking about what those are, and sure, yeah, there's logo, color palette, brand guidelines, sort of those brand design assets, identity, but also think of brand as like, what is that strategy? What is that communication? What is that voice and tone? What is that elevator pitch? How can you talk about your product, in very succinct ways? So I think I really think of like the things that you can control within your companies or organizations, those brand assets, and really focusing on language and positioning. I think those are really important, things to solve first as you look to sort of develop lots of different brand touch points.
Yeah, your touch points should all work together to communicate what that promise is, or what your brand values are, what that experience people can expect is. Can be seen through, all those different types of assets. And yeah, the strategy and the kind of understanding of who you are as a company and who you're for comes before that.
Yeah. Ben, you just listed off a ton of deliverables.
Yes.
And we sit here at Startup Boston Week. And as we know, when you're getting started, budget is probably limited. Maybe it's not. If it's not, you should invest in all those things. But if it is, how much should someone who has never done a branding exercise invest in that first round?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in prepping for this, the call that we had on Monday, I think you have to have something, right? Like, it's not like you can be completely, white labeled and not have a name. So you definitely need some initial brand assets, maybe even before you've developed that brand promise or that brand strategy, positioning. You do need a name. You do need, potentially a quick logo. So I'm not here to say that those things aren't important. They're just not as important as these bigger, more strategic things. And so I would focus on those and the articulation of those. And I think it starts with making sure that you've got research to back that up and to validate those things. And then really think of your brand as a sort of malleable thing that's going to evolve. And so making sure that you're not creating a rigid, corner for you to think about your brand, but these things will evolve. Your brand in year one is going to look very different than your brand in year three. And you want to try to anticipate some of that as you look to sort of prioritize certain brand assets or touch points over other ones.
Yeah, Angie, I'm interested in your perspective on this as a researcher.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do comes early, comes before, or when thinking about like product expansion, rebrand strategy. No matter how long or far that is from the start of a company, or developing a new brand or a new product coming into the market. But there's so much is scalable within that. And I think because understanding what problems your product is there to solve and who you are there to solve for, I think that's kind of the most important thing is to know. You can do that with any amount of time or money. The more you have, the more deeper you can go. But you can talk to people on the street. You can do desk research and just kind of gather like what's happening in the category. Where can we, find a white space, or where can we stand out, even if we're just starting? So I think from a research perspective, it's important to have. I'm a researcher, so I would say that, but you can scale depending on the time and the money that you have. But you shouldn't just not do it. So find a way to kind of fit that in.
Yeah. So maybe I would add too, in terms of brand, especially with early startups, you mentioned rebranding, right? And so a lot of companies, maybe if they're in a really early startup stage, you might not even have customers. So, trying to figure out, what that eventual brand should be, that's probably going to morph and change over time, and who you're talking to, who you're trying to make the case to also can change. So, for instance, I worked at a startup a number of years ago, and I joined very early. I met the founders. It was literally just the three of them who dropped out of school to form this company. And, one of the things that, I did some freelance work with them. I talked to them, and I was, at a very comfortable job. I was very hesitant about joining this sort of like wild startup. But, one of the things that they did, and it maybe is not how someone would traditionally think about brand, but they had this sort of philosophy. They knew they were young. They hadn't run a startup before, but they went out and sought a lot of experts in the field, like the first person who ever did LASIK surgery, for instance, or head of medical department at major hospitals. And so what that did, that sort of became their brand for me as a customer, as a potential new employee. And so I think the brand can change, and how you position yourself can change, but a lot has to do with who you're talking to. And then as time goes on and you get more customers and you have an opportunity to, engage with them and learn from them and do more research on them, that can kind of, morph and change over time. So.
Yeah, I just love this idea of like thinking of your brand audience and positioning, like tweaking your brand and understanding those brand assets for those different audiences. You've got investors, which is critical. You've got employee and like recruiting, like making sure that if you're looking to, hire folks in that sort of first year of your startup, you want those new employees to be excited and, like really kind of adopt that brand. So you got to think of what's a brand that's going to entice them and make them feel like this is a place that they want to invest their career in. Eventually, the users are the most important, audience for the brand. But you got other ones like partners or, kind of B2B folks. So really thinking of those different audiences is really important. One example I'll mention, I worked with a startup years ago called Farwide. They're it's an app for finding places to hunt and fish. It scrapes sort of available government data and provides like a map-based tool for helping hunters and anglers be able to kind of like follow regulations and sort of navigate different places throughout the country on where to do that. And that brand was really important for, hunters and anglers to kind of understand and see themselves in this experience. But then it quickly became like, who are the investors? How do we tweak the brand for folks that are going to invest in this company? And then when I talk about like brand being malleable, as this startup evolved, they quickly found that landowners that could provide land access to hunters and anglers were a huge audience. And so knowing that was sort of a pivot of the company and making sure the brand language and some of those brand assets were built to like sort of kind of market directly to them was a key part of that evolving brand for that company.
So I have a question for my design colleagues here. In some of the kind of startup adjacent communities I'm in, when there's people either, starting a new company or like maybe they're starting their side hustle or something like that, I see a lot of requests for, does anybody know like a freelance graphic designer that could help me make a logo or, have a family or friend because I don't have a lot of budget. And a lot of times what I see recommended is Canva, which I personally am a user of as a non-designer. And I would love to kind of understand your opinion on Canva and, what you think about that tool and when is the right time to use it.
Spicy question.
Tristan, yeah.
All right. So yeah, so I'm originally trained graphic designer. So when I hear Canva, it kind of makes me die a little inside. But at the same time, I totally understand. Especially early startups. They're taking a lot of risk, and they may not have a lot of money to spend. I think one thing to think about is things like Canva are just tools, but it's the information that you put into those tools that gets you the result out. So, I'd rather have someone, if I was advising a startup, for instance, I'd rather have someone, spend some time on research and understanding their customers and what's going to drive value for them. And then once they have all that information, go make a logo with Canva, then not do that and spend their money and hire, like, say, a freelance graphic designer to do a logo and identity for them, and not have as much budget to really sort of look into that, sort of more foundational understanding of the customers. So, yeah, Ben?
I mean, I think to a certain degree, you get what you pay for. So if you're going to use a free tool or a low-cost tool, you'll get, a brand assets that are equivalent. I think those Canva tools and a lot of these generative AI tools are going to get you very derivative brand assets, logos, color palettes. And that's fine, but I think a huge part of a brand is being able to differentiate and stand out in a crowd. And those things generally are sort of, kind of lukewarm, or at least that's my point of view around from a design perspective. But in general, I think graphic design is that industry is being sort of there's a lot of tools that sort of can get you part of the way there if you don't have the resources to hire a professional designer to do that work. So yeah, not saying don't use it, but I think there's some downsides to it. And I think even if you do use it, or you hire, a designer to help you build up some brand assets, making sure that strategy part is sort of solid and fixed and evidence-based and tested to a certain degree with folks. I think that's the part that is key. Don't try to use Canva to solve those things. I think is an important takeaway, I would say.
Yeah. What I'm noticing is that we're tying iteration to these tools, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that for the audience, there is a correlation of how much you're iterating and how much you should be investing. And are you investing in learning, or are you investing in scaling? And I think that the other thing I want to notice as well is that so much of it, whether you pick a tool like Canva, which is such a great question, really depends on your taste or whoever is building your brand's taste. Angie sits in the middle of this panel and will swear that she's not a graphic designer, and she has an adorable brand that she has made for herself. And you should check it out. It's on her website. And you would think that that's a professional brand. And some people are really attuned to that, and some people are not. So you need to know who you are so you can get out of the learning phase and into the next level of scaling. Because that's we don't start to stay in year one. We start to get to year 2 and 3 and 4. And I think that's an interesting place to take the conversation now. It's let's say we've learned a bunch in Canva. We know who we're talking to. We have a better idea of how we're going to achieve product market fit with our product, with our brand. Ben, what is the next step to start scaling?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the majority of the brand work I do at Blink is about sort of not creating brands from scratch, but helping them scale. Just reference my notes here. And I think that's gets into more of understanding the user and sort of what their goals are and designing from the product out. I think that's an important part of thinking about the brand and all those sort of brand moments. I think the one of the important things I think about brand is this idea of 90% of decisions are based on emotion, and so kind of not thinking of we're not using measured considerations or rational decision making. We're emotional creatures, and so I think a brand is a great way to think about those emotions: fear, ego, ambition, insecurity, pride, love, delight. These are the things that are going to drive decision making, whether it's an investor or a user. And so brand is a great place to do that, not necessarily in the logo color palette, but in that user journey, in that golden path. What is that sort of linear or nonlinear experience that users are going to take throughout your product, which might involve, downloading the product, using the product, but also the marketing touch points. And I so often see a lot of these projects that we do for helping scale brand that there's a real conflict in sort of the marketing landing page that talks about the product and then the product itself. And there's usually two different teams that are doing that work. And I find that to be really difficult and problematic. And a lot of times we come in to kind of bridge that gap. And so that's a big recommendation I have is like, don't think of, your brand marketing team and your, product team as separate folks. Ideally, those folks are the same. And you want to start with the product and figure out the sort of marketing strategy out from the product. And yeah, just too often we start a project and the company has hired a brand only agency to create these brand artifacts that are, I would say, very shallow and lightweight and are not sort of like, it's this square peg round hole to then get them into the product. And so we have to kind of untangle and rework some stuff. And that's, I think, really important for scale and sort of the growth of any product and brand.
Yeah, I'll just add to that quickly. Like the consistency being part of your brand promise extends to all of those touch points, app, if you have a digital product or even, any kind of app, website, even like tablet, size, like all the different sizes of your screens and things like that, along with like in real life experiences, the advertising and communication, the consistency is incredibly important in having a brand. Like if you don't care about having this kind of brand experience, then maybe you don't need to care about consistency as much, but I guess you're here because you do want to have that brand experience. So figuring out those touch points in the user journey, even, the people that are not using it, but are around the people who are using it, like that's a journey, a touch point to think about as well. And just make sure that you're being consistent in showing who you are in those different ways.
Maybe I would add to that too, on the consistency piece. So you have things like Ben mentioned the sort of the visual brand. A lot of agencies will do that. One sort of story I was thinking about the other day to talk about here. So the last company I was at, one of the things after I joined, they did a full rebrand, new name, new everything. And one of the things they had was a mission statement. And this was a autonomous vehicle company. And the mission statement was to build safe, reliable, and accessible vehicles. It seems like, of course, yeah, you would do that. But the last part, accessible, one of the things we found on the sort of design and product side was that there was a really big opportunity to help people with disabilities through the use of autonomous vehicles. And it actually potentially solved a lot of issues for them. Now, a lot of companies, when we're dealing with disabilities, because it's a smaller portion of the market, it's often thought of last, not as much investments put into it. And you sort of wind up with sort of a larger problem of people with disabilities not having access to as good services. But because we had that mission statement that specifically called out accessibility as sort of part of our core mission, that kind of freed us up as a team to invest and spend time working on those things. And we ended up getting really, really great results, especially like going and testing these products with people with real disabilities. So I think, things that may not seem connected at all to the brand can have these sort of long tailwind effects through your organization as well. So,
and can I add to that? So, when thinking about scaling too, and just kind of thinking about the future of your company and your brand and your product, is also kind of looking into what is like the fringe or emerging patterns that you're seeing in your category, in adjacent categories right now that, in 5 or 6 years might be like the dominant area where, the category is. So, keeping an eye on just kind of like cultural trends or interesting products that are popping up, even if they don't necessarily relate to your category specifically, but maybe there's a lot of overlap in users, to kind of understand what the trajectory of the category might be or the different directions that your brand could go, so that you can be ready for that, see if your brand like fit, if that makes sense for you to kind of move in these different, more fringy emerging directions, so that you can kind of be at the forefront when those fringe ideas or concepts become kind of more mainstream. So like right now, there's and I work a lot in like personal care and beauty and things like that. And there's so much overlap with everything. Like beauty and personal care could be everything. But you know, there's fragrances that are alcohol free because that's like more gentle for your skin. So fragrance becomes skincare. There is brands there's a brand that I love called 4 a.m. skincare, and 4 a.m. actually is just what the brand is called. So like what do you imagine when you think of a skincare brand called 4 a.m.? Their whole thing is like, stay out till 4 a.m. because we've got your skin. It's, we got you covered. Like you don't have to sacrifice, you can party. Their product photography is gritty, textured, distorted. It's like not what you would expect from a skincare brand at all, but they kind of understood this like Gen Z not anti-wellness, but like a moving away from like the goop, Gwyneth Paltrow side of like personal care and things like that into this kind of like, you don't have to eat an almond and to like be healthy. You can go out and party, and it's just like a totally different way of looking at the skincare category. And it's a way that a lot of skincare brands would shy away from. They don't want to be associated with like people drinking alcohol, eating pizza, like all these kind of behaviors that we don't associate with wellness. But that's like what they've embraced, and they're just like such an interesting brand to watch, that now a lot of skincare, personal care products are leaning into that kind of like hedonism concept as well. And they were kind of one of the forerunners there.
I'm going to take a second to pull out some threads from what we were just talking about, because I think this is important. We're talking about product being connected to the marketing. We're talking about multiple teams coordinating around a mission sometimes. And so I think the question that is coming up in my mind is, who needs to be bought in to deliver the brand across the product and the marketing? And have you worked with particular groups that did it very well?
Yeah, I think you need to have a strong leader at the top to be able to have these things and understand the reasons why, right? Like the why is like so critical to any of this work, and making sure that that's articulated really well from the top down, and that there's a shared narrative around these things. I think that's really important. And then being able to hopefully delegate, this is going to sound self-serving, delegate to, consultants like Angie and I that will come in and do this. And I think the important part of that is that not because our outcomes are good, which they are, but I think a lot of times we think of, when we work with companies in this brand space, there's the hard deliverables that are sort of in the SOW, that you're getting, these core product flows, you're getting these assets, these guidelines. But there's a huge area of soft deliverables that I think is really valuable for startups and teams and companies, which is, during the course of the project, you're going to get a crash course in how to do brand, how to, kind of see those insights, like the things that Angie was talking about. Like it's one thing to have those insights, but to be able to work with a team to be able to figure out like where to look for those sort of, emergent areas, or, different brain exercises that we do within a project. We do them because it's essential to coming up with really great artifacts and outcomes, but our clients get these soft deliverables where they sort of, kind of learn how to do this. And so I just love that sort of teach to fish model of thinking about, who are you going to partner with to, kind of move these things forward, whether it's, an outside company like us, or you're looking to hire someone on your team to sort of, shepherd that work. I think that's a really key part of making sure that those soft deliverables are a key thing, and you're sort of building this muscle, as opposed to just looking for a silver bullet sort of, brand assets.
Yeah. So in terms of it was like who did it best, Dan?
Who did it best? Yeah.
Who did it best? So I think maybe there's two categories. So one I'll mention, and I touched on them earlier, but the startup I was at for a number of years called Luminopia. They make FDA-approved vision care devices. And one of the interesting things is, so when I was there, it was before anything was approved. It was still early clinical trials, things like that. But essentially, the audience was like the FDA and doctors. And so the sort of early brand that we worked on, it still had a logo that to this day I hated, but the overall brand, it worked really well. They were able to like sort of really focus on talking about like the clinical efficacy, where other competitors in the space weren't sort of taking that same route. And it ended up getting them, sort of the backing to run big trials, and eventually got FDA approved, and now they're scaling, doing really well. I think so that that's on one side of maybe a different type of audience. For more like the consumer side of things, I know we were talking about this the other day, and there was some debate if they're good brands or not. But I think I've seen a lot of brands in recent times, like Allbirds, for instance. That have sort of come on board and had a really, really big impact. I think, in the case of Allbirds, one of the things that they really touted was like the materials they use. I know Tom's is another footwear one that's similar, but they're, I think, a B Corp. So like they're actually their corporate structure is even set up to sort of like not just enrich the CEO, which if CEOs in here, I know that, want to get some return for your investment, but also, they have an obligation to their shareholders to make decisions that benefit the company and benefit the environment and things like that. So I think there's different ways, depending again on the scale and all that, but those are a few that have like stood out to me.
Amazing. When we were talking earlier this week, we were talking about this trend of blanding, which is, I think, a really interesting concept, because we're sitting here talking about aesthetics and how that's a great way in to recognize your brand. And then you see a lot of brands sort of like becoming very homogenous. And I wonder what the take is from the panel on what does that mean about brand?
Yeah, and just when we say blanding, does that resonate? What's a good example for the blanding? It's a lot of these. It happened in the fashion world as well as in the tech, where they have like maybe an ornate logo, and now their new logo is just plain sans serif. Google did this. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, like I don't know. There's a popular image where it's like in the luxury fashion house, like Yves Saint Laurent, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Burberry, they all have these black sans serif font type, word mark logos. You can't really tell which brand, if you just had a glance, like they're not distinct from each other in terms of like how their logo word mark looks. But yeah, like, when Google makes the little changes to their thing, even Instagram, Facebook, right? All these, it's real, like even, there's just so many, it's just the sans serifness of it all. It's like,
so if you look up the term blanding, you'll quickly understand what this is. And I think the general critique is like, this is not great, right? Everyone sort of looks the same. It's all sort of like really clean and sterile and austere. And I think that's a reaction to the culture in some ways. And my take on the blanding is that I see it as somewhat beneficial, because I think what I see as the sort of trends below that is that it's not about the logo. Who cares what your logo looks like? Who cares if it's a serif or a sans serif? All these companies are investing in brand moments that aren't sort of brand identity. They're the product or sort of the stories that they tell. They're those core things. And that's, I think, a positive shift in our industry to focus on brand moments and experiences, not just how great your logo looks or your color palette or your sort of kit of parts for your brand identity. That's my take.
Yeah, and if you're not investing in differentiating yourself from your brand experiences, then people will not know you from your competitor, because exactly. If your word marks and logos and color palettes all look the same and chic and black and white and things like that, you really need to back it up with something else that's distinctive, to make people, remember you and what your brand is and what you represent. I'll let Tristan answer, and then I just want to make a comment after.
Oh, okay, sure. So yeah, actually, this is a really interesting topic. years ago when I was working in the agency world, one of our strategy leads, it was really smart. I worked in healthcare prior. We used to do a lot of healthcare work. And one day he told me about something he called the thumb test. It was if you put your thumb over the logo on a company's website, in this case, hospitals, could you tell it was that hospital anymore? Or is it just a hospital? And I think it was very much the case. If you did that, they would all start looking the same, blue, sans serif font, et cetera. But I think what that sort of highlighted is that well, as important as things like your logo and your identity are, it is the sort of the stories behind it that you're telling, the experiences you're giving people, the content that you're sort of serving up, how you're talking about it beyond that just first initial glance. And yeah, that was just something that stuck with me. But with your comment?
No, I also do think that there is maybe the pendulum is swinging a little bit back towards a lot of personality and a bit more maximalism and a bit more fun and playfulness, just kind of in a lot of different spaces. So, maybe we'll be back here next year and we can talk about everyone looking the same, but in a maximalist way. I don't know, but no. So I think, and it's also like what you choose for your brand assets. Even if you're choosing a very simple sans serif word mark, you're still communicating something about your brand too. So even if you feel like that kind of style fits you and fits like what you're trying to communicate, there's nothing wrong with that either. But it's just kind of understanding how your assets are communicating your brand to people and kind of what that message is in all those different touch points.
I want to try a little experiment. I hadn't thought this through, but and these are not startups, so it's not maybe relevant necessarily, but I'm going to name some brands and I'm going to be able to see your facial reactions. And that to me, I think gets at what the emotion is of the brand. Like when I'm going to say these things and kind of what feeling comes to mind and see if you can, express that on your face. Microsoft Excel.
Shout it out.
Was that a dig? Is that?
I think Microsoft Excel is the best piece of software in the world. I think it's incredibly powerful. The Olympics.
The MBTA.
The T.
Andrew, you're full of the spicy stuff.
NASA. New York Times. So like those obviously are not startup brands. They're very big. They've got these long established, records. But it's you hear those things. You can think of the logo and the brand assets, but it's the feeling that you get when you think, oh, like I'm a power user of Microsoft Excel. I know how to use it, or it's really a really frustrating piece of software, or the T, which I think can be very divisive. But that's the brand, is like the feeling that you get when you sort of, get, an understanding of the product and what they're offering. And so those are some of the emotional things that you're after when you're trying to create your brand.
All right. So to bring it back to startup land, I'm going to give you all a hypothetical. If you could invest in only one thing to create that brand experience, what should it be? A great identity, a great customer story to the market, a great user experience, or something else? Tristan, you want to start us?
Yeah, I would say just a great understanding of your customers, because everything can sort of flow from that. How you want to position yourself, how you want to be viewed, how you want to be perceived, how your product should be used. What are the unique sort of situations about those customers that might cause you to build your products one way or another. So I think that, getting a really good foundational understanding is really critical to doing good design sort of thereafter. That's all.
Of course, I will agree as a researcher. I always do research. I think, if you chose user experience in that thing, how do you get a great user experience? You understand what your users are going through and how they're using your product. And you do that by talking to them and listening to them and observing them, or just, creeping on Reddit and, listening to them talk about you in that way. But yeah, I think it's hard to choose one, so I'm not going to, but start with research.
Let me see if I can take a little bit different answer. I think with your products, your organizations, your projects, whatever you're working on. It's just a massive amount of uphill battle for you to get noticed at all. I think that's the real challenge with any of the things that we work on, is that there's a million reasons for me not to care about anything that you're doing, any of your products, whatever you're offering. And so how do you cut through that noise? And so I think that's a key brand moment of like, what's going to be that, brand initiative that's going to help cut through the noise. I think it's probably narrative. Like, you have to have a really good elevator pitch, a really crisp narrative, and then make sure everyone in your organization is telling that story in the same way. So when it comes to consistency, I think it's less important. Consistency is really important from an internal perspective. And so really kind of figuring out what that narrative is internally, I think that's a really great brand initiative to do. And then my background's as a graphic designer, so I'm not going to say don't do visuals, because I think those can be highly emotive and they can help you cut through the noise. Is that a logo and a color palette? Maybe, but I think it could be something else. It could be a really compelling, slide presentation, outline. It could be a really, kind of sexy MVP prototype. And that, I think, can be really great. And just people are visual learners. And so, coupling a narrative and the way you talk about it with a really sharp visual, that, and both of those need to be provocative, because nobody has time for your startup or your initiative, and you got to figure out a way to get noticed. And I think that's a really hard thing to do. And that's my take.
It's a good take. So everyone, like, we are unanimous in knowing your customer, and like a strong brand growing out of that. So Angie, you're the researcher in the room. How do you execute a strong research program at an early stage or later? Or like, who are the right people? When is the right time?
Yeah, I think the number one most important thing, if you're going to run any research, is understanding what the goal of the research is. And you don't have to do research just to do research. You should have a question you want answered, a hypothesis you want tested. I get into trouble sometimes with some of my clients who don't have clear goals. They want to know more about this audience, but I have to push them. Why? What is this going to impact? Why do you care? Why right now? There's all different times to do research and starting out there. But I think getting really crisp on the objectives and the goals, everything follows from that. And if you're not clear, then I could do all the research in the world and maybe you wouldn't care at all, because I didn't actually answer the question you wanted, because I didn't know the question you wanted. So I think if you're thinking of starting research, or even just, you want to understand your customers, but what do you want to understand about them, and why is that important for you to understand? And do you have a hypothesis to answer that? And I think, I work with creative teams. I work with art directors and copywriters who are working on an ad campaign. I work with product development. I work with marketing, brand strategy, UX designers, all different types of teams. And I think all these teams could benefit from research, but it's understanding like what are the objectives, and then who are the people that you should speak to answer that. It could be internal people, it could be experts, it could be customers, it could be non-customers of all different, definitions, demographics, use cases, things like that. And then, making sure you're asking the right questions to get there. But it all starts with like getting really, really clear on that objective and thinking about like, okay, if I'm going to give you a 100-page report or something like that, slides, what are you going to do with it? Who's it going to go to? Who's it going to see? What decisions is it going to impact? Because why do it if you're not going to use it? Is how I feel there. So yeah, getting clear on the upfront objectives is, I think, the most important step.
And I think that I feel like you need an expert in that field to help with that. I think on one hand, you've got Canva, you've got generative AI tools, you've got maybe a student designer that can help you create, some brand assets. Those things I feel like you could potentially, do yourself or put together these other things. I feel like there's no equivalent on the research side to like kind of shortcut the research process. I think if you do that, I think you're not going to get very good insights. You're going to get misleading information. So really kind of investing in someone that can sort of help you build that muscle around doing really great research, namely primary research. At Blink, we're really passionate about qualitative research over quantitative. So doing those qualitative sessions, usually it's a 60-minute interview with the person to really understand the why behind it. Those I find to be really invaluable, particularly for designers that are going to help scale a brand. So yeah, kind of doubling down on what Angie said, and I just think there's not an equivalent of a free product that's going to help you do that. And so partnering with people that kind of understand the research process and that you can learn from.
Yeah, and now, there are AI tools out there, generative AI tools that say they can act as like a research proxy, and you can check those out if you want. But also remember that, AI can only know from like what it's trained on. So if you're trying to think about the future or talking to people that aren't part of the model of the AI, it's not going to give you those kind of really interesting nuggets or those forward-looking nuggets that you can use, because it's only comes from what exists already. So that's my pro-human approach.
Yeah, and so that's super helpful. I guess this is a question for Tristan and Ben. The next step after research is connecting it back to those deliverables. Are there any wise words about how teams should do that?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I know we were saying we didn't want to do it depends answer, but it would, I think, depend a lot on the stage of the company and what they're trying to do. Do they have a product they're rebranding, for instance, or is it fresh? So I think certainly some of the baseline stuff like visual identity is, as Ben was talking about earlier, making sure that that is differentiated is really important. But again, just having to have that good understanding up front is really important. But yeah, I think it sort of depends, I think, on what the thing you're just what pointed stage in your company it is, and it could be the logo website, it could be something like a pitch deck that just getting that really good could be the answer. So
I think when you're working on some of these brand initiatives within your company and you've got really good actionable user insights, research insights, you have to be able to connect, and you got to practice this in your internal meetings of like, here's the assets, or here's the deck, here's the whatever we're working on, and here's how it connects to this research insight that we found. Like making that a formal process is really key. And what that does together as a group, you're going to make the subjective objective. And that's a key part of what I see as the design process, is making sure we're all on the same page. We all share the same truths and the same insights and the same facts. We're all on the same page there. That'll help us then sort of critique any sort of artifacts and outcomes that come from that work. And so doing that in a collaborative way and making very formal connections to the insights, I think is a great way to like really kind of build up that sort of evidence-driven, research-backed brand process.
Could actually jump in with one more. So I think I have a little bit better answer. A company I was at not too long ago, we're a new company, and so we had a whole like official branding thing with a really well-respected big branding agency, and they gave us what I could only assume was the standard package, which is probably a package if you've ever worked with branding before. It's got your logo, your colors, your fonts, and some basic things, and it was great if we wanted to create like a poster. Unfortunately, being on the product team, we actually had to deliver software, and there was nothing in that brand guide that actually like gave us a lot of insight outside of what fonts and colors we could use. And so I actually had my whole design team go through an exercise to sort of build upon that brand guide and actually get us the information we needed to be able to have a consistent sort of like experience design. And so I think in terms of what comes next after that research, I think there's probably, and I'm sure this is not Ben, but there's probably a lot of companies out there, they have like their standard package and it seems all great. And you'll think it's everything you need, but every company is unique and what you're going to need may vary. And so I think really finding a partner, if you're going to hire, like say an agency to do that, finding a partner that you can really work with and sort of tailor that engagement so you're getting exactly what you need out of it. So.
Amazing. Thank you to this great panel. I think we should open it up to questions from the room if there are any. Whatever.
Yeah, well, amazing panel. Thank you to all of you. So you could be very specific or broad, as you wish. Thank you. So can you like just talk an experience of a common pitfall brands make? It could be a startup or a company. I don't know, like common pitfalls or misconceptions or biases. I don't know, whatever you want to share with the audience. Thank you.
I have a example that's been on my mind of a brand making a misstep, and it was when Bumble, the dating app, recently had a big campaign where it was like really didn't connect culturally with where people are at dating in this time. It was about like, you don't have to be, I forget exactly what it was, but maybe you'll know what I'm talking about. It was like, don't say goodbye to like celibacy or like something like that. Like find your match on Bumble or but it was like pretty dismissive of maybe a lot of reasons why people might be choosing celibacy or not choosing celibacy. And they took it down like within a day because there was such outcry of like this kind of really tone deafness to the culture of the people that they are trying to connect with and be their users. And it's a lot of times some of these weird cultural missteps, like the Google Dear Sydney ad. I don't know if anybody watched the Olympics, saw that a lot at the beginning, and then not so much, where it was like Sydney or Google Gemini, tell my daughter how to write a cute letter to this track star that she loves. It's like, okay, you don't want AI to write a cute letter from a 6-year-old to their hero. That's the antithesis of like how you should be using AI. And like the most important part is like the emotion of writing that letter. That ad got taken down because there was this outcry. And it's like, if you don't understand the culture of the people or like how your product is being talked about, you can make these big missteps. Like, let's not forget Pepsi and Kendall Jenner. And, a lot of times that happens also in-house. In-house agencies are creating these campaigns, and they're so steeped in the brand that they forget to like look outside and connect with people who have other points of view and a lot of other experiences that could have stopped them before they got to that point of spending all that money.
Thank you. So this is a question especially for you, Ben, because you mentioned that example of the company that had a fishing kind of type of audience, and they did a pivot. So when it comes to branding, and if you're a company that's going through that pivot and you already may have a few customers on your first customer segment, but you're focusing now on this new expansion, how much of the initial brand you need to keep, or you should truly like go full in towards your new segment?
Yeah, I think because it kind of relates to this question, because I think my favorite brand projects that I've worked on and the things I see in the wild are the ones that are malleable, right? Like that's a key sort of thing that I would recommend for any brand. In the startup world, you're inevitably going to pivot, and so hopefully when that pivot happens, you're not sort of locked into a rigid brand, whether it's brand assets or sort of the positioning. And your brand foundations allow you to pivot, and sort of like the key thing is trying to make that malleable in tactical ways. That can mean like a brand identity system that lets you sort of mix and match words, and like you kind of build that from the beginning. So trying to anticipate that, I think, is really key. It can be really tough though. So I think that's the part of like hiring a designer that can think of your brand in a malleable way. And then, I do think at some point there will be sort of the positioning that will need to change, and then investing in sort of brand articulation, especially if there's a wildly different market that you're going after.
Thank you so much. I have a question about balance, right? How do you balance the need to be exclusive and build your own brand with the developed industry standards? Like companies like Google, invest, like go through 41 iteration of blue collar in their links, and which allegedly increases revenue by $200 million. Like there's kind of like no reason not to use that for your advantage, right? Like there's always this, or like the way the mouse over effect changes on the button. Like why try to come up with something like your own when those companies invested hundreds of millions of dollars figuring out what works, right? Like 14 milliseconds response time kind of thing, right? So how do you balance that sort of industry expertise with with your own kind of need to be unique and be noticed?
I think where I go with that is that there are established best practices, and those can be really important. One of the things that frustrates me when I see brand articulation is that they will do things that are inaccessible. So one of the best reasons to understand best practices is that they oftentimes are addressing sort of like a variety of abilities and disabilities. And that is really important. You don't want your brand all of a sudden, oh, it really resonates with a certain sector or with your founders or something like that, but then is inaccessible to people with certain, disabilities. So that's one of the reasons I think that best practices are really important. And you've got companies like Google that like invest a ton of money. Like some of those things are solved problems. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel on some of these things. And I think that can be really key. So that's kind of the one reason to go. So when you're going to try to differentiate and stand out a crowd, make sure you're not doing that, at a disservice to, accessibility standards.
A few years ago, I did a lot of research on a logo that I wanted. And so I contacted an attorney, and not only did this woman want to charge me all this money, but then I found out that whatever government agency it is that, approves your logo, it takes years for them to, do the approval. So do you have any suggestions of, how you could deal with that in a less expensive and less time-consuming way?
I think one thing, and this is only from my personal experience because I did make my own logo for my company and I wanted to, make sure I was kind of being distinct. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. But what I read was if you do start using it, like, a very distinct logo, for example, that kind of sets like a precedence for it being your brand. So that might help a little bit if, down the line, if you can't spend the time or money quite yet. But again, I'm not a lawyer. That's not legal advice. Something I came across when I was reading about it, though, is like, when did you start using it and connecting it to your brand? And sometimes that helps set something. I probably shouldn't have answered that because, again, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, it's a thing that comes up a lot, and it really depends on where you're at. And it's like, if it feels expensive, it's probably too early. And as your brand develops and it becomes, something that you need to protect, is the time to engage with a lawyer and talk about trademark and copyright. But it is expensive. I don't think that there's like a great way around it. And there's just a ton of bureaucracy. And I think I would highly recommend to just like focus on the connection with your customers and your audience, and like build your brand so strong that the logo doesn't matter. And it can change.
Yep.
Better answer than mine.
Hi, I'm Melanie. Thanks so much for the panel. What are your favorite rudimentary research tools? Like the SurveyMonkeys, Typeforms of the world? What do you like to use?
Yeah, I use a ton of different tools. The tools should come after the goal of the research, 100%. Even the method should come after the goal. So I do a lot of different types of research. I'm not going to run a survey just because someone wants numbers. I'm going to find out, what's the goal of the research, what's the right method to get there, then figure out what the tool is. So there's a lot of different ones, but just go back to kind of what that goal is. Even, I use Google, I use Reddit a ton to get to where I want, but I'm happy to chat after if anybody wants specific tools. But yeah, there's a lot out there. It all depends on kind of what you need.
Can I maybe jump in there? So I am not officially a researcher, so I would take her advice first. I would definitely say, though, that I would be, just over the years, I found to be very cautious of surveys, particularly how they're written. Especially if you're early on and you don't have like the investment available to like engage with a researcher. It can be very tempting to use something like SurveyMonkey, and it's $10 and you can, or a couple $100 and you connect with 500 people. But not just the method you use, but how you even use those methods, how the questions are written. Being careful that things are not leading questions. You can almost, if not done right, can actually set yourself up with incorrect information. So just something to be really cognizant of, I think.
Yeah, I was a trained survey questionnaire writer, and I can say it's incredibly important to make sure you're wording your questions the right way, not the right way to like get the answers back that you want, but thinking about biases and answer options. Even though I'm a trained survey researcher, I also love qual, like Ben was saying, that Blink really focus on to get the why. You can work together to do both. Yeah, you can, if talk to a bunch of people, understand the language that they're using, the answers that they're giving. Then if you want to understand, okay, what's the scale of these types of responses, you could do a survey afterwards. Or you could do a survey first to understand some of the kind of more basic things, and then interview those people or similar people to kind of get the why behind these answers. But yeah, I would say surveys are fast and cheap, but they're not easy to do them the right way.
All right. On that note, I think
Awesome.
that is our time.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for an amazing panel. If you're sticking around, the next session is Cracking the Code, Product Success and Market Research. And speaking of brand, we would really appreciate it if you would follow Startup Boston on our social medias and give our content some love. And we hope that you guys will stick around for the startup crawl. That'll be departing from the first floor at 6 p.m. It'll be really fun. So yeah, thank you guys so much again for your time. And
Angie, can you guys get in? Could you take a photo?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was trying to see if you're going to be able to reach it. No, that's it. Perfect. There you go. Nice. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Yes.
In the future.
Hi.
I'm Julie in the UX research.
Oh, great. Nice to meet you.
Sure.